Okay, we're back on D.L. Moody. I just broke the clip, and we are in our second session with Moody. Hello, welcome back to the Agon Institute's 21st Century Models of Sports Ministry course. We are in the midst of talking about D.L. Moody and in a basic section of revivalism and sports outreach. Get your PowerPoint notes back out, start filling in the blanks, start doing all you need to do to get your A in the class if you're taking this for credit. And as you know, we are looking at many of the muscular Christianity era pioneers of the sport outreach movement and learning from their 1800, 1900 models so that we can form our own for the 21st century. So pay acute attention to these models that you can learn, and keep in mind some of them are what not to do as well as what to do. So let's move in now. Moody is back in Massachusetts, and he has begun to understand that God has given him great oratorical skills, and that the country is ripe, and actually the world is ripe for these mass mega meetings and events, and he brings people together. You see there on the 9th slide of this PowerPoint presentation, the first 8 were last lecture. You see him preaching to a large crowd. He believed that evangelism by revival was the most effective. At this particular time in his life, this is what he really believed. He has come now to Massachusetts. He's starting to gather momentum for an evangelistic organization. And what you're going to see is he begins to bring some people together around him. And one of them is the man you see now in your picture, Ira Sankey. Sankey was born on the eastern border of Pennsylvania, actually the eastern border of Ohio, just across the line from Bessemer, Pennsylvania, not too far from Youngstown, in between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And he has been honored in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which was just not too far away, where he did some work as a young man with youth. And the rec center there is named after him. And he had got the same kind of background as Moody, that he was working with inner city kids and working with the down and outs. But they formed an unbelievable team. Another model for you. Who's going to be on your team? Who has different skills than you do to come in your 21st century model? Moody was the preacher, the visionary, the well-connected person. Sankey was more of the nuts and bolts guy to make it happen, and he was a musician. And he and Moody together maximized an incredible way to fund their ministry. And this is something that many of you, particularly in the para-ministry world, where you don't have offerings every week like a church does to support you, you have to raise money. Moody and Sankey developed what they called an economic engine. An engine that would be driving their ministry forward through some basic capitalistic economics. For them, it was a hymnal. Sankey was rich in his ability to be able to crank out music and attract other musicians and songwriters, hymn writers, poets. They formed this separate group to fund these hymnals, and they made over $1 million in royalties. And in that day and age, we're talking, I wouldn't know what that would be in today's terms, but it was a lot of money. And so the two of them, not only were they being successful in ministry, but they were finding creative ways to fund the ministry. And there's no shame in finding capitalistic-based ways of making money for the ministry to go forward. They began what has now become known, what we've deemed and termed the North Atlantic Corridor, going from America into the UK. And this started when they went to England and held a revival. They held a revival in England, and if you remember our talk about the Stud Brothers, that they were converted. The Stud Brothers' father was converted, and the brothers came along after that. And it was there, while with the Stud Brothers, that Moody spoke to the college club of Kynaston Stud at his prodding, and which began a long-standing relationship between the two men. And so they traveled the world around, and they began this North Atlantic corridor that went back and forth. We'll come back just a little bit to that later. But while he was home, remember, he had moved to Boston, then to Chicago, and now he's back home in Northfield, Massachusetts. It's right up there in the northwest corner of the state, real near the green and white mountains of Vermont and New Hampshire. Beautiful setting. And he built his base. Part of the reason he went back was to take care of his mother and some of his siblings. Remember, his father, her husband, had died many years ago. And sometimes in ministry, a model for you is going to be that you may have moved away for school, you may have moved away for a job, but at some point, being around family is also your responsibility. Don't overlook that call in your life. It doesn't mean your ministry ends. It means just that God's got another plan for you. And this was true for Moody. So you see again the home that he moved back to. You also see his office where he began to make all of his ministry come alive to. Now, I've happened to have sat in that very chair. When I did my field research there at Northfield, I got ushered into where he was and the chair, and I got to tell you that two of you and I could sit in that chair comfortably. Yes, he was a very rotund man. He had this chair specifically built for him because of his girth. He acquired more land and more buildings, and he began to establish his international relationships. This all giving him further credibility, giving him more relationships to bring back home and into the ministry, but it also gave him a renewed vision. His time in England with Kynaston Stud, and now his time back in home, gave him a renewed vision to reach college students, and renewed his vision and passion for one-on-one evangelism. Now, I'm not sure that I can specifically tell you that Moody would say that the revivalism, these mega events, were something that he said, don't do them anymore. No, he continued to do them. He continued to believe in them. But he also began to understand how important that one-on-one and that small group was. So let's pick it up. He goes and he leaves for England and Scotland. And when he's there, the people in Scotland, obviously, they're a little more reserved even than the English in some of this way. They didn't like this emotionalism of the revival, and yet he really won them over. I've written a little bit about this, and it's in a chapter in the book on recreation and sports ministry edited by John Garner, if you'd like a little more insight about how to dig some of that out. Because he was accused, Moody was, of just getting a day's decision for Jesus as opposed to a lifetime disciple of Jesus. And because the revival said, come forward, do it now, do it now, do it now. One of the things that you're going to have to do in your 21st century models of sports ministry is get to a theological foundation of soteriology. What does it mean to be saved? Now, what I need to communicate to you on this is that we are not doing that in this class. But I'm connecting this class with our theology of competition, our ethics of competition, and our theology of ministry, and on it goes. You've got to take those other classes because this is a very key point. And Moody wrestled with it. And he came to a both and in mega events, revivalism, big crusades, but one-on-one, small group relationships are so important. You need to know your model, and you need to figure it out based upon soteriology, the theology of salvation. All right, so he left over there, and he didn't go for a week. He went for a long time, and he did return an international figure now. As I said, he got a lukewarm reception at first, but there was a growing exception here in England. You see in the 13th slide, you see the picture of Big Ben. They didn't immediately rush to his ministry, but he eventually embraced it, and he was very effective. He stayed for 2 years. Now here's another thing. Side model. He's there for 2 years. His family goes with him. He never went anywhere without his family. Always took his wife, always took his kids, always is too strong, but you get the feeling. You get the understanding. This is very crucial. For you as a sports minister in the 21st century, if you don't keep your marriage solid and you don't raise your kids well, you will be out of the ministry. At the very least, if you stay in the ministry, your ministry will not be nearly as effective. What we have come to understand through anecdotes and through research is that those that have a good ministry always have a good home life. Or we should say it this way. The better your ministry, the better the home life. The better the home life, the better the ministry. They go together. One may eclipse the other for a short while, but if they're not going together, they'll both crumble at one point. Moody is a good example. All right, he influenced many of the aristocracy during the time in England. He also influenced the common person. And he financed many of the YMCAs throughout England with contributions from the revivals. Now, here's another model. People are always wondering, where's all your money going? There's one particular paraministry in America that they get money from upwards to 5,000 churches. Well, how are they living? People begin to look at the staff. They begin to look at what's going on there. And it hasn't always been received real well when ministries like this build and build and build and high salaries, etc., etc. And the common person kind of feels left out of this. This is a reality in the 21st century that you've got to understand. Here's my basic advice, counsel. Your salary should never be more than what would be an average salary for those that are involved in your ministry. We recommended for sports ministers at a local church that they should be paid equal to, on par of, what a local teacher would get paid. It shouldn't be so low that you can't stay in ministry, but it shouldn't be so high that people resent giving money to you. Moody left money that he garnered from the Crusades in England. He didn't take it back home to build his home. He left it there and built YMCAs. Crucial model. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that stud influence, just to remind you that through that Cambridge invitation of Kynaston Stud, Moody reconnected with college-age people. And this began a series then of events for him, and this is a picture of the Stud brothers on your 14th slide, that began to engage and set the platform for much of his work and much that has come beyond. Now, this North Atlantic corridor continues, and you see myself with two compatriots of mine, Steve Quattro, who's been the director of SOLA, Sports Outreach Los Angeles, and also a professor at Azusa Pacific, and Brian Mason, who has been on the staff of Christians in Sport in England, and also founded the Higher Sports. And the three of us were together in England. We were all on the CSRM staff together, and that this relationship across the North Atlantic corridor continues on to this very day. And I would really recommend that, whether it's England or another place, that your ministry get connected internationally as another model. It's going to do so much for your 21st century model. So Moody went to Cambridge, and then Kynaston Stud goes back to the Northfield conferences and the North American campuses. And then the Scottish evangelist Henry Drummond comes to Northfield, and others come from England. You can begin to see that these North Atlantic corridor opportunities began to really open up many, many more doors. All right, I hope you're grabbing hold of the models, the things that you need to incorporate, envision, and think about. Are you the visionary? How are you raising money? Can it be capitalistic? What about all these family and other kinds of things that we're learning from Moody? To get an A, you've got to come up with the models that are making sense to you. I'm Dr. Greg Linville. We're going to end this segment of D.L. Moody, and we're going to come back next time and pick it up. And how did he end? What went on in his life at the end? Thanks for joining us. Oh.